pioneering solutions, transformational technology, and inspirational leaders. I'm your host, Connor Sherman, and this is the Confident Defense Podcast. And welcome to the Confident Defense Podcast. I'm your host, Connor, and today we are diving into the future of security with our guest, AJ from ByteChek. So for many of you listening and watching this, you are probably as excited as I am to see a familiar face here on the show. We have Stefan Semmelroth, who, if you remember from a few episodes ago, he joined us as a guest. We had such an incredible conversation, and his passion for transformation and security, I begged him to come join me over here at the show. So Stefan is someone who has come through the U.S. Army Rangers. He has built and sold a cybersecurity company, and now he is transforming careers on LinkedIn through his mentorship program. So if you haven't connected with Stefan on LinkedIn, do yourself a favor and go over and do that. Stefan, it's great to have you here, mate.
I'm super excited to be here. We've been friends for a couple of years now. We spend a lot of time talking with each other off of mic, so it's finally super exciting to be able to come on and have those conversations on mic, out in the public, and glad to be here, glad to help shape and grow, the legion of professional defenders that are out there right now, and excited to talk to AJ as well.
And again, AJ, the love is mutual here in the sense that I'm so happy to you again to be here. So you're the co-founder and CEO of ByteChek. You're a founding board member of the National Association for Black Compliance and Risk Management Professionals. You've got, on last check, 6 AWS certifications, including Architectural Professional. You got security specializations because what you do is help people secure their AWS environments, not just get them compliant. I've seen you be on podcasts with the SANS. You're a SANS instructor. You teach the SEC 557 course. I mean, you are just a powerhouse and truly, truly improving the cybersecurity community. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Connor. You make me sound way cooler than I think I am, but I'm excited about being here on with you and Stefan, 2 additional powerhouses in this space, and I think we're gonna have a really great conversation today.
So, dude, let's dive right into ByteChek, right? This is a really cool company. And obviously, when anyone starts a company, they are committed to it, right? So can you tell me kind of lay that groundwork for us? What is ByteChek? What drew you to this problem space? And why did we need a company here? Why did we need some disruption in the security compliance space?
Yeah, absolutely. So ByteChek is a cybersecurity compliance software company, and we built our platform to do exactly what our motto says: make compliance suck less, because anybody that's been through compliance knows the process is not fun. It sucks. And the reason why I'm like, I need to start a software company to solve this problem. I used to be an auditor. I used to be complicit in making compliance suck. I used to be that auditor asking for screenshots, asking for stuff that didn't make any sense from a technical perspective, and going through and producing audit reports that weren't adding security value to companies. And I wanted to create a software solution that, yes, you're going to get a SOC 2 report out of it, or ISO, or whatever 4-letter alphabet soup compliance framework you're chasing. But since you're spending a bunch of money, since you're spending a bunch of your people's time or your time, you should get security value out of this. You should actually improve the security of your organization, and it should matter. It should help, and it should be something that you look forward to. So we built a solution to make sure that when people are going through compliance exercises, it's not just to check the box. It's improvement on security where everyone gets better. And that's really what security is all about, continually improving. And that's what ByteChek has done in the cybersecurity compliance space.
Nice. I mean, it's been really great to see this sense of automating security. Something I want to dive into a bit more, automating security compliance portion of that, because there is a sense of can we reduce the cost in order to have that business value? And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But why did we need a transformation here? What was wrong with the kind of the current state or previous state of going through and getting your SOC 2 Type 2 for most companies? What was the problem that you came in to solve?
Yeah, there's just a few problems in general with compliance. The first being the auditors. Traditionally, auditors are not technical, so they will run from anything that has to do technical. When I used to perform these assessments, and I'd be traveling all over the world, sitting in these conference rooms for way too long, people would say, "Hey, you're a technical auditor. You're going a little bit deeper than what we're used to." And I never quite understood the term. Because if we're auditing technical environments, what's the alternative to being a technical auditor? There's no other option, I don't think. At least there shouldn't be. And that's the mindset that has been adopted in this space. Auditors are not technical, so they are going to come in and not ask you for things that may make sense for your environment, that may have, they may be asking you for firewall rules and you're hosted on AWS and you're like, well, I got security groups, but I don't have any traditional firewall rules. So that's the first problem. Auditors were not technical enough, and there's no reason for them to get technical enough. In the SOC 2 space, you're having a CPA sign your report. Most CPAs aren't going to be cloud experts, unfortunately. So they need technology to help them bridge that gap so that they're not wasting the organization's time that they're auditing. They're not sitting there confused and just going through a check the box exercise. So that's reason number one. And reason number two is going back to the who's impacted by compliance. A lot of things that I've done in cybersecurity, a lot of things that I care about now are about people. And it's about how are people spending their time. Security professionals are notorious for burnout. They're notorious for being worked, burning the candle from both ends. And it's oftentimes when you have an engineer who should be out building an application, who should be out actually fixing things or changing things, and they're spending 8 hours in a conference room with an auditor because the auditor doesn't understand what they're asking. The engineer doesn't want to give them too much information because they know they'll show them something that might be an issue, so they're skirting around the problem, and everybody is just wasting time. And I think we should be able to talk directly to engineers. Compliance, oftentimes there's a lot of people sitting between the auditor and the people that are developing the application, but we need to start there. We need to go back to where those people are at developing the application and think about security and compliance there. Think about it from the initial state of configurations and not necessarily through all of these other manual activities. So for me, it was really about solving the problem of auditors. We're not going to create a bunch of technical auditors pretty fast, but we can create software. And then helping organizations not waste their valuable resources, those engineers that should be doing things, stop wasting their time so they can get back to growing your business and producing things that are going to matter so you can hire more people and do more cool things for whatever your organization is.
That's awesome. So it's you kind of talked about like the fencing back and forth, throwing swords, whether it happens to be the compliance auditor and the leadership or the programs or the engineers, and like the 8 hours of the engineers sitting in the conference room, and that doesn't count potentially the day or two getting ready for the audit or all of the do outs that they have that it might take them 30 seconds to crush after, or it might take them a couple days to go through and get those screenshots. So I've got a couple of questions here, but the first one I want to ask is what was the light bulb moment that AJ's sitting there and you're going through this process again, probably the 100th, 200th, 300th time of conducting an audit, and then walk us through kind of that mental journey of, okay, I'm going to go build this thing.
Yeah, you can thank AWS really for ByteChek. I started to learn a lot more about AWS and just became kind of obsessed with cloud security and understanding how it worked in the cloud, because it was just so fascinating to me that you can go from idea to application in the matter of minutes sometimes, depending on what service you're using. And then you have a bunch of security weaknesses because you just did everything by default. And it's like, wow, I have so much to fix. And then the more anybody that's learned about the cloud, or I guess not just the cloud, anything in technology or cybersecurity, the more you learn, you realize you don't know anything, but it makes you even want to go even further and just keep going. So I learned a lot about AWS because 80% of my clients were hosted on AWS. So I was constantly seeing this stuff repeatedly. And my aha moment were security groups. So we're sitting there and I realized we've traditionally been asking for screenshots of security groups out of the EC2 console. And I had just went through, and I don't know which certification or whatever I did, and I realized that the EC2 console EC2 is a regional service. So if I grab a screenshot of the EC2 console, I'm only seeing security groups in that region. Now, most companies that we assess are hosted in multiple regions. And I realized, and I was like, oh, I don't know if this is a PG-13 talk, so I won't say anything, but
it's an honest talk. Oh shit. It's like, okay, we now have gaping holes over in the EMEA space because the controls didn't come over. Yeah.
Exactly. And I realized, we're doing a disservice to our clients. We're telling them that, yes, you have security groups that are protecting unauthorized access. And I have no clue what's going on in US West 2 or US East 2 or wherever else you're hosted. And I realized, well, there's this thing called Trusted Advisor that will go out globally and get all of these security groups and tell me which ones are bad. And that moment, I realized how many other things are we collecting, not only the wrong info, but the info that's not telling the complete picture. So we're not doing a technically accurate job. And anyone that's been in consulting or any kind of professional services firm, change there is about as hard as change in the military. It is difficult to get a professional services firm to change the way they do things, to change methodologies. So I kind of came to an endpoint where I'm like, I'm not going to be able to fix this problem at scale here. I have to build something to do it. And that's what made me really go hard at figuring out how to launch ByteChek, was I realized I wasn't doing a good job. I wasn't providing a good service to my customers, to my clients, because we weren't collecting the right information.
That's awesome. I always love talking with other founders and what that spark moment was. And so for you, it sounds, the deeper that you got on this particular issue and focusing on building and all that, like 6 AWS certifications, you had the depth that you needed. You understood the pain from at least one side, and you were able to translate that over. So now let's talk about afterwards. Do you potentially have any numbers or case studies of potential savings for the clients just through the audit? 'Cause I'm sure with what you're doing, auditors probably only need some fraction of the original X that they'd have to spend. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so we did the math on the controls that we have in our platform and the typical controls you'll see in a security, availability, confidentiality, SOC 2 type 2. And we're saving auditors, we're automating testing on over 70% of controls that you typically would see. But I think that's one piece of the pie, because yes, automating evidence collection is cool, but I think the key that we have done is now a SOC 2 report that you get from ByteChek, you're gonna have 20 plus custom AWS security controls in it. And the problem that I also saw out there is I would go out and pick up all of my competitors' reports. I'd see SOC 2 report for this company on AWS, SOC 2 report for this company on AWS. They all were the same. I'm like, there's no way everybody's using the same services. Like, people do different things. And then there was a common theme. I never saw any controls around S3 bucket access. And I'm like, well, I know a little bit about AWS. There's a big risk there. Like, people leave sensitive data in these buckets. And if I do a Google search all the time, you will literally, if you're watching this, press pause if you can, if you're watching it or you're listening to it in your car, go down a rabbit hole on Google and search S3 bucket breaches. You will be back in a couple of days with how many people have been breached with open S3 buckets.
Yeah, or go check out Gray Hat Warfare, and they go through and they index all the S3 buckets they can find on the internet, and then you can put in keywords and just be like, here's what it is. All they're doing is indexing it, and it's just incredible the amount of data that gets surfaced through that.
Exactly. And you pick up a SOC 2 report and you don't see any controls around S3 buckets. And it's like, well, this is a security report. And the number one thing that people talk about being breached on in the cloud and AWS is not in your report. What did you just spend 3 months, X amount of thousands of dollars and all this time on? And you didn't even check the biggest weakness there. So with us, the thing that I think people, the advantage of working with the ByteChek, the advantage of working with auditors that care about security is your report won't look the same. You're going to actually have a report that says you're doing these unique and cool things as it relates to your compliance program. That's not the same as your competitor. Your competitor might get a report from X firm and it's going to look exactly like every single one of their reports that have ever came out of that firm, which kind of highlights the problem. People don't value these reports because they all look the same. and they don't see the difference. There's no point in picking up and reading a SOC 2 report. You just need to get it to make sure you check that box internally for whatever vendor management. But I'm trying to change that to where we actually care about the details. We actually care about what's in the report, because that's the competitive advantage. Connor and Stefan, I'm sure you all have seen it being security practitioners. Security is becoming a selling point. It's a way to grow your business. And SOC 2, a report that you give to prospects or customers, why not let that from a third party say, here's all the cool things I'm doing. And by the way, an auditor said, yes, I do this for consistently for 12 months.
See, absolutely. And I'm seeing that all the time. Like, especially if you're moving into, a new region or a new market, or we've got clients everywhere, and they're doing that exact same thing of, okay, just show me that, and that becomes the key to unlocking new revenue in these markets. And the past few months with SolarWinds and CodeCove and Kaseya, now like we have clients that are going out to their clients, and their clients are saying, hey, are you checked for these things? How do you sit? Print Nightmare. And it's becoming, again, from both a supply and a demand side of driving revenue.
So let's talk about that. Like, you touched on a little bit there, AJ, and I want to just kind of highlight, what are people doing wrong with the SOC 2 and what are people doing right with the SOC 2? Because I had this LinkedIn dialogue with your co-founder not too long ago, and he was talking about like how SOC 2 is just like a reporting structure. And what matters is the controls underneath, and there is flexibility because the COSO framework doesn't dictate how we do it. So how should we as security leaders lean into the flexibility that we have here? And then as consumers who are looking to do third-party risk assessments, how should we be using these SOC 2s? Like, so help me position that right from both those perspectives.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great way to think about it. So from the security leader internally, you taking advantage of that flexibility, to me, is the whole point of SOC 2. If you don't want a flexible report, if you don't want to have something that's customized, don't do SOC 2. There's literally no reason to do a SOC 2 that's standard.
NIST 800 or ISO 27001, right?
Yeah, like just because ISO 27001, the output, if you've ever seen, it's a certificate. It doesn't tell you anything about the company. It doesn't tell you anything about their environment. So if you just want to check the box and to get a cert, go do one of those. But if you're like, hey, X client asked us for a SOC 2, leverage this as an opportunity to dive deep, to really get an assessment of what's going on. Because like Connor said, the COSO framework, which is the framework that SOC 2 is that we're governed by underneath all of the criteria that's set forth by the AICPA, it's not prescriptive. You literally, everybody knows with SOC 2, there's this trust services criteria, and that's what the AICPA has set. And we always say, SOC 2, generally 99.98% of SOC 2 reports include the security trust service category. That's like the foundational baseline one. Most people don't know that you can do a SOC 2 against any framework out there. You can say, I'm getting a SOC 2 type 2, and your criteria, your framework or standard could be NIST 853. It could be ISO 27001. It could literally be anything. You don't have to use the trust services criteria. Now, that would be a little bit of a unique report, and you might have to find some folks that can do some AICPA jujitsu, but you don't have to do that, which all that to say, you can be extremely flexible, not only in the controls that are presented, but what the auditors look at. Oftentimes, organizations are trying to scope their SOC 2 down. And I oftentimes am like, well, can we just pull that out a little bit? Because I'm sure I can make a connection between that tool over there and your production tool. Because a hacker doesn't care if the person in accounting has a good password or not, because they're not on the engineering team. They don't care. Bad actors are going to find a way in, no matter what scope you did for your compliance assessment. So why not expand it so that you can find out what those vulnerabilities are? And I think from a security leader perspective, we have to get back to the basics. Really, in all of security, we have to get back to the basics, which if we look at the definition of a control is a risk mitigating activity. That's it. It's you're doing something to mitigate a risk. So if we're looking across our organization and we know we have all of these risks because we've done great risk assessments, which, we'll see if that organization has done those or not. But you have all these risks. You should be thinking about, let me use my SOC 2 to address those risks, because that's all this is about. It's not about a compliance report. A control is a risk mitigating activity. And now an auditor can come in and say, yes, you're doing these things to mitigate risk. So if your container is completely serverless, there's different risk for you than if you're a completely on-prem Windows shop. And that should be reflected in your SOC 2 report. So security leaders there's two things that they should do. Think about it immediately as a flexible framework and tailor the goals of what you want to get out of it from a security perspective. And then when you're shopping for your auditor, don't just shop for the one that gives you the fastest and the cheapest audit. Shop for the one that's going to actually knows your environment. If you're on Azure, find an Azure auditor. If you're on AWS, find someone that knows AWS. Don't go to a heart doctor for a foot problem. And that's what people
I want to talk about this. Yes. I want to talk about this.
Yes, people do it all the time.
Yeah. So what should we be doing, right? I mean, I was told, always get the cheapest price. Does that work out for everything? No, but seriously, like when security leaders are leaning in and they're looking to go down this path, what do you recommend? You've been on both sides of the fence here. You build software for in the middle. So you've got a unique perspective on the entire life cycle. When a security leader is engaging and trying to help the business win and help us move into those regulated markets, move into those enterprise deals, and they say we need that piece of paper, there is this opportunities you just mentioned. How do we leverage that opportunity to the biggest effect?
Yeah, first things, think about your tech stack. Everything in security requires context. There is no security solution out there that will fit every organization. So know your tech stack. Know if you're hosted on AWS or Azure or in an on-prem rack space, wherever it is that you're hosted. And then first things first, ask the auditor what they know about that environment. Just at a high level, what do you know about Azure? What are some of the things that you've seen from your experience in Azure from a SOC 2 perspective? And really what your goal is, you want to hear them say, well, I know that we have Azure Security Center, we have Azure Sentinel, we have Azure DevOps that can do all these different things. And it helps us reduce some time on testing. And then you're like, okay, great. So because you have this experience, because you know Azure and it reduces your time on testing, I assume that those reductions in time and efficiencies will result in a reduction in cost for the actual audit. Because if I, as an auditor, no longer have to do manual testing on all of your storage accounts on Azure because Azure Security Center tells me the results, that means less man hours, less billable hours for my associates. So your overall price should go down. So the goal of getting the lowest price, which all security professionals have that challenge of, I have a very limited budget to accomplish a ridiculous amount of things. So I completely understand the cost thing, but I think if you focus on finding people that know your stack, that know how to use the stack to reduce their time, your cost will drive down, your time of the audit will drive down. So focus on finding someone and talking to someone that understands your tech stack. Now, a trick that often happens, and I was complicit in all of these things as a former auditor. I'm like, it's like I'm on trial. And
you're out for good behavior.
You are.
So we're giving you time off.
Right. I would be on sales calls as a principal at this consulting firm, and I'm saying all these great things. I'm like, I have these AWS certs. We're going to go in your environment. We're going to do all of these things. And they would sign, they would go through their audit, and I would be nowhere to be found. You would not find me anywhere near that assessment because obviously we're a big professional services firm. It's really expensive to have me do audit work based off of my billable rate, right? So what I would say as a security leader, talk to the people that are going to work your project before you sign. Find out who is leading that engagement. It's not going to be that person on that sales call. It's just not. So you need to find out, does the person that's going to show up, do they understand AWS? Do they know what to request? Because if not, they're going to ruin your audit experience too and slow you down. And then Connor, to the second side for the consumers and the customers, again, understand your tech stack. So in a SOC 2 report, Section 3 is going to lay out the software, the infrastructure, the data, the people, and the processes that support the system that is being evaluated. So you should go immediately. Most people take a SOC 2 and they flip to the back. Let me see if there's any issues, any exceptions or deviations. That's not where you should go. The first place you should go is Section 3 because that tells you the scope and that tells you where their environment that was audited was, where it's hosted. So sometimes I've come across customers, we've issued a report solely focused on their AWS environment. We get a call 2 weeks after issuing it. Like, hey, we're getting a customer that says this report doesn't include the IBM environment that we're on. And I'm like, interesting. I've never seen your IBM environment, so that's why that report doesn't include it. They're like, could we just add it in there? Like, no, that's not how this works. But that's the thing, that customer, good thing they checked, right? Because they're hosted on IBM. They know that they're trying to see the security status of this organization. Report, the SOC 2 that they got didn't even look at the environment where their data is. So you shouldn't care about the exceptions. The first thing you should care about is, does this report actually reflect the product I'm using? And is it in the cloud that they say that it's in, that all my stuff is in? And then from there, you start to flip back and see what are some of those controls. And that's where you should see custom controls for that cloud environment. If you know that there's been a big breach of S3 buckets lately in fintech companies, and you're dealing with a fintech company, look for S3 bucket security controls in this report, because that's what you should be concerned about. So again, security and compliance, there should be context applied here. And oftentimes the consumers of the reports are treating them as check the box too. They get it. They're like, oh, let me look in the back. No exceptions. We're good to go. What about the scope? What if it wasn't even relevant to what you're doing? There's a lot there, and maybe we'll do something, Stefan, where we'll through a SOC 2 report and hit on some of these highlighting points. But I think it comes back to making sure that if you're reading a report or you're going through an audit, it's reflective of the environment you care about. That's the biggest thing that happens in compliance, or the scope is just sometimes tailored down or just thrown all over the place. And you might not even actually get evaluated on what matters or what the application is that you're using.
Those are phenomenal points, and that gets back down to the CIS fundamentals of, what do you have, and what's running on it.
Yeah.
So I fully agree with you. Of let's take that inventory and see what makes sense. And I can tell you how many times, the old joke of, oh, is that an AS400 in the corner? Yeah, it's running something really important. Okay, what do I do with that? So you also mentioned something there of, for anybody listening that's looking at potentially going out and procuring software services in general, of often when the sales team, the pre-sales team comes in, whether it's account manager or whatever, they generally will bring a pre-sales engineer. They don't always bring a delivery engineer with them. And you were, you'll be in prison in general, like a social prison, not real prison, because of that, right? So what gets sold in the beginning is not necessarily what's in the end. So again, anybody listening, keep that metric of, who was on the call, what was promised, and then who was the delivery, and do they actually match up? Because then you get to make your own vendor scorecard at the end of how good they are. So I'm going to flip that around on you, AJ. How often, when you are bringing in, going out on sales calls, how often do you bring in your engineers and architects and the people that are building the software that you take to market?
Yeah, so
to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough now at this stage because I've been, cooking the food, serving the food, cleaning up the table, wiping the stuff off my customers' faces, doing the full 9 yards of taking care of folks. But I've becoming a real CEO now, and I'm actually stepping back, and my team's doing more of those sales calls and pre-sales calls, and I'm coming in at the end to talk about ByteChek as a whole and philosophically, but I'm not diving deep into our methodology and our product anymore because I can't as a CEO. And honestly, I had to transition because I realized I wasn't working. I couldn't work all these customer engagements anymore. It's not sustainable for me to build the product and work the product. I realized that was the case, and I didn't want to get back into the same situation that I felt when I was doing professional services, where we bring out the big guns for the sales, and then next thing you know, there's a kid that was in college last week that's on your project. There's nothing wrong with that kid, they're trying hard and they're learning, but it's not the same experience you were sold. I think in software it's a little different because you're relying more on the software versus the people, but you should still make sure that what you're being told is going to be what you're getting, especially in audit, because in the audit space, there's so many nuances. There's so many, and it's pretty hard to leave an audit partner. You're at least in that relationship for a year. So you want to make sure before you go into it. I see a lot of organizations that make very fast decisions on audit. And I think that's a mistake. I think you should do your shopping. In the military, we used to buy something, you had to get 3 quotes every single time. If you had to buy something, you had to get 3 different quotes. And that was just military rules because we were trying to make sure people weren't being bribed.
And those are small purchases.
Yeah, those were tiny. Those were, like $1,000. I think I bought like some VTCs one time, and I had to do that. I'm like, it's $1,000 purchase. What are we doing here? But I think we should do that.
It took me 1,000 man hours of getting the RFP.
Exactly. And that's how audit should be. I've given customers away where they're like, hey, this is our environment. We're completely on-prem. We would love to still work with you. I'm like, hey man, like we built an automation platform for the cloud. This probably isn't the best fit for you. As much as I want to take your money and grow my business, this probably isn't the best fit. Now, if you're hosted on AWS, we're all over you. We want to help you out and help you grow and automate your compliance. And I think hopefully we can build more security, honesty, and just transparency when it comes to stuff like that. But from the audit perspective, you have to find someone that understands what you're doing intently, because they are coming in not only to give you this report, but in order to do that, it's a very short window. I don't have a ton of time with people. My software, even though we can go out and automate these things, if you're doing a report, you don't have a ton of time. You have a very small window. So I have to become an expert on your system, your processes and procedures pretty fast. At the same time, I can't be learning AWS. I can't be figuring out what an EC2 instance is and then trying to give you advice on how to secure your compute servers. Like those things have to already be taken care of. And that's why I think people should do shopping, have a lot of conversations, talk through some of the nuances, find out if they have any custom controls that they know about. And from a cloud provider perspective, that can help you in your report.
That's awesome. And I love that mix and the focus area. So I'm going through some big permitting projects for home projects together, and effectively every project that we do that we have a permit for, whether it's HVAC or plumbing or electrical, you know who the inspector is that certifies it? An HVAC inspector, a plumbing inspector, an electrical inspector, not just a general inspector. That is their focus, and that's your area. And if you have a permit or you have a company that's 3 areas and you look at 2 of them, where's the third? You got some gaps there. So I like that you're doing best fit too. Like, hey, yeah. I don't do plumbing.
Yeah, like I can't help you. I'm sorry. I want to help you, but I can't. And you have to be able to say that, and especially in audit, because then I'm going to go in there and I'm going to say I have all these cool things, and I can't even evaluate your systems correctly. Now, I'm sure I could figure out a way, but it just wouldn't be as efficient, right? And I think that's a great example of, you have in all of these other fields and all of cybersecurity. If you think about just cybersecurity, we have IAM engineers, we have network security engineers, we have cloud security. We have people that just solely focus on like static code analysis and SaaS testing. And then in compliance, it's just like, hey, I'm an auditor. It's like, wait, we need some specialization there.
Yeah, exactly. Check the box, check the box, check the box. And that's actually one of the things I want to bring up here is fixing this relationship with our auditors. And I think there's something to be said there about finding the right treating auditors, not like the one size fits all. One thing, there is this thing called an auditor. Well, there isn't. There is an AWS security auditor. There is a compliance auditor, the security audits. There's different frameworks, there's different flavors, there's different tech stacks. And as you mentioned so eloquently, just being able to find the right fit for you, for your company. And you may end up having, if you're a big organization, multiple audit firms who are doing different things because they're different specializations. You need someone who is really good at ISO for cloud native companies. Like that's a pretty unique Venn diagram versus somebody else who's on-prem and really good at ensuring that you're FIPS compliant with the encryption keys and the hardware that your modules that you're making, right? Like very different spaces to be in. So to that note though, I wanted to kind of get, what are some of the things that, I'm gonna share a small anecdote, but the real question here is how do we as an industry stop treating auditors like they have leprosy, help bring them in and so they can actually help us. My first introduction to auditor in my career was this. I worked at a financial services firm. We had an internal audit function because every financial services firm does. And I was helping So I was like in the lunchroom, a guy walked past and he liked me, I liked him. And he said, hey, Connor, I need to check if somebody has like McAfee running on their endpoint. How do you check if it's really running or if the icon is just showing up there? Like, how would you turn it off? And I was like, oh, that's a really good question. And so, I mean, I'm 19 or 20 or something. I walk in, I'm like, well, here's the registry keys, here's the process, here's the things you can kill, and going through that. And as I was about to kind of get into it, my manager walked by at the time and said, oh, he saw what was going on, read the room instantly. And said, oh, Connor, come here for a second. And I said, oh, okay, dude, I'll be back to talk to you later. And then I came over to my manager. He's like, look, you can't educate the auditor on how to evaluate our security controls. He was doing it for a subsidiary. But I was just like, well, why not? Aren't they here to help us? And the answer was, nope, not really. They're here to point out issues. They make their paycheck on finding problems, and then our CISO and CIO have political nightmares to make if they have bad reports. So like this whole adversarial relationship was set up inside the same company. And it was just like, got it. That was my introduction to here's how you view the auditor. They're not here to help you, but they on paper should be here. So anyway, long story just to kind of get like, I imagine I'm not the only one who started off his career with that kind of tone and temperament. So like, what should we be doing here? How can we help fix this so auditors can be an asset and not a liability?
Absolutely. And I think that's a common thing that I used to see as an external auditor. I walk in the room, our first meeting is tense. No one wants to talk. I'm like, hey, how's it going? What's your name? They're like, I'm Connor. Like, well, okay, well, what else, what do you do? Where are you from? Let's talk. I'm not a bad guy. I'm just here to, look at some stuff. And there is this adversarial relationship. And I think it goes back to the fact that security professionals see auditors as a nuisance. I mean, they're a fly that just keeps smacking them on the face. They're not anyone that's coming in and adding value. And I've seen the relationship change with my customers when they realize I know a little bit about what their tech stack is. When they realize that I can actually give them a little bit of advice that maybe they didn't know about, because most security professionals, we're paranoid. We know we don't know a lot. And if someone says something that is interesting about our environment, we perk up and we're like, wait, what did you just say? And how do I do that? Because I need to go check if I'm doing that in my environment. And
oh, by the way, let's go get a marker board and I want you to draw this out. I'm going to take a picture of it and make sure the rest of my team knows. So thank you.
Exactly. So I think we have to go to, and it goes back on both sides. The auditor should be adding value. They should be not just finding issues, they should be adding value. And one way that an auditor from their angle can do this is live off the land. Use the same tools that your DevOps, your DevSecOps, whatever you're calling them, engineers are using. If they're using OS query, guess what you need to do? You need to go learn a little SQL and start to do some queries. Go find some compliance query packs out there because they already are using it. So it'll be very easy to say, hey, Jim and DevOps, I wrote this, this query really quick. It might be wrong, but can you just give it a shot and try to run it? Because if you do, that meeting that I have scheduled for next week, you don't even have to show up. I'll have everything I need just from you running that right there. Or, hey, so-and-so, can you hook this up to this AWS environment? If you do, I'll be able to pull all this information in, and I don't have to call and ask you tomorrow about how you're managing your IAM users. And if you as an auditor, whether you're internal or external, are able to come in and say, oh, you're using that tool? Great. I know exactly how to get a bunch of information out of that tool that I need from an audit perspective that will reduce your time. Those engineers, that relationship goes from adversarial to a partner relationship. You are friends now. And now when you find something, it's, hey, I found this. Also, here's how to fix it. The problem with auditors right now are they're like, hey, I found some stuff with your security groups. Looks like you all are allowing unrestricted access over like these 7. They say launch wizard, and it's like port 22 in AWS. Well, enjoy, go fix that. I don't know what that is, but I know it's bad. And your engineers are sitting there like, well, I have 100 security launch wizard groups. What's going on? Or you can say, hey, when your developers are spinning up new EC2 instances, they're forgetting to delete the default security group. That's why you have 100 of these. So maybe you should have by the way, here's an AWS config pack on how to do that. That changes the relationship. You're adding value. We in the military are taught not to present problems without solutions. And in the audit space, you're taught to present problems you're taught to present a problem and then run away, write a report, and then go and bill some more hours. And we have to change that. We have to stop presenting problems without giving organizations not just Hey, you have open security groups, close them. No, that doesn't help anyone. Hey, you have open security groups. Here's how to fix it. Oh, also, here's how to automate it. Here's how to monitor it. Here's all the different ways. And then here's how to produce evidence from it that won't take up your engineer's time. So we have to, I'm biased, but I'm going to put it on the auditors. The auditors have to get better. They have to live off the land. They have to use these ubiquitous tools that everybody can use across OSs. I haven't evaluated an environment in a very long time that was like one type of virtualization or one type of OS. Everyone is doing either like an EC2 instance, a container here, some serverless stuff here. You got Windows, you got Linux, you got all kinds of stuff. So you can't go in and say, I'm going to do one type of test. Doesn't work. You have to be able to use tools that your team, these organizations are using these tools to do this stuff. There's no way they're creating all these apps and not being able to touch them with something. Yeah. So figure out what that something is and then use that to do your audit. That's the way that we start to add value. But it does require auditors to step out of their comfort zone, or people like us at ByteChek to build tools to make it easier for them.
Yeah, because I can imagine, like, especially in the SOC 2 space, it's written by AICPA. So it's financial auditors showing up to do a security assessment. Like, that's a huge gap to cross there. So, I mean, and I guess that's where you show up.
There's a good example of that.
By them, right? As an industry, hey, these things need to be audited. We're good auditors. Like, I can't fault them for that. Good on. Let's make some more cultural change and get to steps 3, 4, and 5, though, so that way we have that, and that, that's cultural change. So exactly. I'm hoping that we can, there will be some auditors listening to this that go, oh, great, we can do that, and then let's share some of those maybe playbooks and commands out there just as an industry, so that we can get to yes faster.
Yeah, and I'll give a good example of that, where a financial firm or financial, whatever we call it, AICPA, created a security report. In SOC 2, there's a criteria called CC 6.8. It says the entity prevents malicious software from entering or being exposed in the environment. A bunch of adjectives and verbs, right? After that, but preventing malicious software. And the guidance from the AICPA is all about antivirus and anti-malware on workstations or endpoints. And I'm like, that's great. That is a way. But most people do a defense in depth strategy. There are multiple ways to stop malicious software from being introduced into your environment. And now you will pick up a bunch of SOC 2 reports and you're going to see the company has an antivirus solution. And then you go back up to section 3 and you're like, wait, they're all serverless. So where exactly is that McAfee endpoint deployed? How does this work? And you start to put the pieces together and you're like, well, I get it. They're trying to address CC 6.8, but that's not the only way to do it. You can do a bunch of different ways to prevent malicious software. But unfortunately, auditors in the AICPA haven't dove that deep into maybe understanding how does infrastructure as code work? How do I shift security left? Where are some of those things? And that's what the kind of the issue is, but that's where we have an opportunity to go deeper and not just do exactly what the criteria says.
Cool, mate. So I wanted to leave off with one last thing here, which is this sense of like, I see this consistency through startup to IPO, where security leaders have the chance to grow with the company and build a program. And that is this COSO framework. And like, I don't know if it's well enough understood, but if you're a startup and you're trying to win that deal, people say, get your SOC 2, COSO builds on that. If you're a public company and you're trying to get listed on the New York Stock Exchange, they ask for the COSO framework underneath your IT general controls. So there just seems to be like this magical theme where you're like, if you build a security program with security first, lean into the flexibility of the COSO framework, it's kind of like we have the opportunity here to have a consistent foundation that we can build on as the company matures. So I want to get your quick thoughts on that as we wrap up here.
Absolutely. I think, we talked about this a while ago, Connor, just offline, and I was like, this is a brilliant way to look at it, because oftentimes people go through SOC 2 and they're only thinking about right now. And I always tell folks, like, your first SOC 2 is going to look a lot different than the one you get in 5 years. Hopefully, yes, it looks a lot different in 5 years. Yeah. And essentially, especially if you're going to go public at some point, if you have the framework there that you're using, the same exact framework that you grew from 5 employees to 400 employees, that cybersecurity program that you're having to maintain and have a lot of eyes on once you get to that public level is going to have some teeth to it. It's going to have some depth to it. And you're going to be able to say, this COSO Principle 13, we've been addressing since we were a team of 4 of us. and look at the trajectory of how we've addressed it. We used to do it with one control. Now we have 7 controls here, and you can show growth day one to this new board and all these people that are having eyes on it. And it's a great way to look at it. So I think there's a book that recently came out. I can't remember. It's a shame on me for not being able to remember his name. Well, maybe I'll put it in the show notes. Startup Secure. And it's all about what startups should do to be.
Yeah, Crossbeam, right?
Yep.
He's actually coming on the podcast in like 3 weeks, and I can't remember his name either. But yes.
Yeah, great guy. That book is like a great start, but I think this is the mindset. Do the things now, and they're going to prepare you for IPO later on.
Got it. Well, AJ, Stefan, thank you so much both for your time today. I'm like so excited. AJ, I love that idea of us circling back on this and doing a deep dive into a SOC 2. I think a live stream on here's how you read a SOC 2 would go a long way. But we'll connect offline on that. But guys, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Folks, if people want to connect with you, AJ, what is the best place? Where should they be connecting with you?
Definitely LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm fairly active. Well, not as active lately, but I'll be getting back active soon. I try to respond to most messages on LinkedIn as well. And I do a lot of mentoring, just like Stefan. So if you're looking to get in the field, reach out to me. I'll find some time to chat with you and reach out. I like a good conversation too. So if you disagree with something I said, let me know. And I'll take your thoughts in, and maybe I'll change my mind, and maybe I'm thinking about compliance wrong.
You'd be the first person on the internet to do that. The first person on the internet.
When that happens, let's do it in a public forum.
Yes, there we go. We'll make history that day. AJ, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Good to see you, man.